The wind cut through the mountain pass like a blade made of ice, and Hannah Morgan knew she had made a terrible mistake leaving Denver without proper provisions. But desperation did not wait for wisdom or warm weather. Her worn traveling dress offered little protection against the bitter November cold of 1882, and her horse had thrown a shoe 3 miles back, leaving her stranded on the road between Aurora and the mining camps beyond. She stood shivering on the roadside, watching her breath form clouds in the frigid air, when the sound of hoofbeats approached from the south. The rider who emerged from the swirling snow sat tall in his saddle, a broad-shouldered figure wrapped in a thick coat with a hat pulled low against the wind. He slowed his horse as he drew near, his eyes sharp and assessing beneath the brim. Hannah could see the frost clinging to his dark beard, the weathered lines around his eyes that spoke of years spent facing whatever nature threw his way. He was perhaps 26 or 27, she guessed, and carried himself with the quiet confidence of a man who knew how to survive in this harsh country. "Madam," he said, his voice carrying clear despite the wind, "you look like you could use some help." Hannah wrapped her arms tighter around herself, pride warring with practicality. "My horse threw a shoe. I was heading toward Aurora, but I cannot seem to make much progress on foot in this weather." The cowboy dismounted in one fluid motion, his boots crunching in the thin layer of snow that had begun to accumulate on the frozen ground. He moved to examine her horse, running his hands down the animal's leg with practiced ease. "This fellow is not going anywhere today without proper care. Aurora is still 5 miles off, and this storm is getting worse." He straightened and turned to face her, and Hannah noticed his eyes were a striking shade of green, like summer grass in a land that seemed to have forgotten warmth. "I can offer you a ride into town on my horse. She is strong enough to carry us both." Hannah hesitated, knowing she had little choice but still uncomfortable accepting such an offer from a stranger. Yet the alternative was freezing to death on this lonely road, and she had not come this far to give up now. "I would be grateful for the assistance, Mr. Austin Miller," he said, touching the brim of his hat. "And you are welcome to it, Miss Morgan, Hannah Morgan." Austin nodded and moved to his saddlebags, pulling out a length of rope. "I will tie your horse to mine, and we can lead him back to town. The blacksmith there can see to his shoe." He paused, studying her more carefully. "If you do not mind my saying so, that coat you are wearing would not keep a sparrow warm in this weather." Hannah glanced down at her thin wool coat, the one she had hastily grabbed when fleeing her circumstances in Denver. "It is all I have at present." Something shifted in Austin's expression, a softening around his eyes that made him look younger despite the hard life etched into his features. Without a word, he shrugged out of his heavy sheepskin coat and held it out to her. "Take this." "I cannot," Hannah protested, even as her body screamed for the warmth she could see radiating from the thick garment. "You will freeze." "I have layers beneath, and I am used to this weather," Austin said, his tone brooking no argument. "Besides, I will have the horse to keep me warm in front. You will be behind me, taking the worst of the wind. Please, Miss Morgan. I would not be able to live with myself if you caught your death on my watch." The genuine concern in his voice melted her resistance. Hannah reached out and took the coat, the weight of it surprising in her cold, numbed hands. She slipped it on, and the warmth that enveloped her felt like a blessing from heaven itself. The coat smelled of leather and wood smoke and something else, something masculine and reassuring that she could not quite name. "Thank you," she said, meaning it with every fiber of her being. Austin's response was a slight smile that transformed his face, making him almost handsome despite the roughness of his features. "It suits you better than it does me anyway." He finished securing her horse to his own mount and then swung up into the saddle, extending a hand down to her. "Come on then, before we both turn into ice sculptures for the tourists." Hannah grasped his hand, surprised by the strength in his grip as he pulled her up behind him. She settled herself on the horse's back, acutely aware of how close she had to sit to him, her arms wrapping around his waist to keep her balance. Even through his remaining layers, she could feel the solid warmth of him, the steady rhythm of his breathing. "Hold tight," Austin said, and urged the horse forward into the storm. They rode in silence for a while, the wind howling around them like a living thing determined to tear them from the horse's back. Hannah pressed closer to Austin's back, grateful for his bulk blocking the worst of the gale. Her mind wandered to the reasons she had left Denver, the scandal that had forced her hand, the family that had turned their backs on her when she refused to marry the man they had chosen. She was 22 years old and alone in the world, heading to Aurora because she had heard there was a need for school teachers and she had nowhere else to go. "You picked a rough day for traveling," Austin said over his shoulder, his words nearly lost in the wind. "I did not have much choice in the matter," Hannah replied, then immediately regretted saying anything. She did not need to burden this stranger with her troubles. But Austin did not press for details, which she appreciated. Instead, he said, "Aurora is a good town, growing fast with the mining operations nearby. If you are looking for work, there are opportunities." "I am a school teacher," Hannah found herself saying. "Or rather, I was training to be one before circumstances changed." "The school there just lost their teacher," Austin said, and she could hear the thoughtfulness in his voice. "Mrs. Henderson moved back east with her husband when he took ill. The town council has been looking for a replacement. If you are serious about teaching, I could introduce you to Mayor Collins. He is a friend of mine." Hope flickered in Hannah's chest, fragile as a candle flame in the wind. "You would do that? Why not? You seem like an educated woman and the children need someone to teach them. Besides," and she heard the warmth in his voice now, "anyone brave enough to set out alone in weather like this has the kind of backbone that Aurora could use." They crested a hill, and suddenly the town spread out before them in the valley below. Aurora was larger than Hannah had expected, with several streets of buildings clustered around a main thoroughfare. Smoke rose from dozens of chimneys, and even through the snow, she could make out the bustle of activity that spoke of a thriving community. Relief washed over her so strongly that she felt tears prick at her eyes. Austin guided the horse down the slope and into the town proper, steering toward a large building with a sign that read, "Miller's Livestock and Stables." Hannah felt him tense slightly as they approached, and she wondered at the significance of the name matching his own. An older man emerged from the stable as they drew near, his weathered face breaking into a smile when he recognized Austin. "About time you got back, son. Your mother has been fretting something fierce about you riding out in this weather." "Son." So this was Austin's family business then. Hannah felt a flutter of nervousness at the realization that she was about to meet his parents. "I am fine, Pa," Austin said, dismounting and then reaching up to help Hannah down. His hands at her waist were steady and sure, and she found herself reluctant to step away from his warmth. "But I found Miss Morgan here stranded on the road with a lame horse. She needs shelter, and her mount needs the attention of a blacksmith." Austin's father, a man with the same green eyes and solid build as his son, studied Hannah with keen interest. "Any friend of my boys is welcome here. I am Andrew Miller. Let me take care of your horse, miss, and you go on inside with Austin. Margaret will have hot coffee on, and you look like you could use some warming up." Hannah wanted to protest that she was no charity case, but the cold had seeped so deep into her bones that she could barely feel her feet. She nodded gratefully and followed Austin toward the house attached to the stable, acutely aware that she was still wearing his coat. The interior of the Miller home was warm and inviting, with a large stone fireplace dominating one wall and comfortable furniture arranged to catch the heat. A woman looked up from where she was kneading bread at a sturdy wooden table, her face lighting up at the sight of Austin. "There you are," she said, wiping her hands on her apron and hurrying over. "I was starting to worry." Then her eyes found Hannah, and curiosity replaced concern. "And who is this?" "Ma, this is Miss Hannah Morgan. I found her stranded on the Denver road." "Miss Morgan, my mother, Margaret Miller." Margaret's eyes, warm brown and filled with the same kindness Hannah had seen in her son, assessed Hannah quickly. "You poor dear, you must be frozen through. Come, sit by the fire. Austin, get the lady some coffee. And for heaven's sake, why is she wearing your good coat?" "Because she was about to turn into an icicle," Austin said, moving to the stove where a pot of coffee sat warming. "Her own coat was not fit for this weather." "I gave it to him in exchange for the ride," Hannah said quickly, not wanting them to think poorly of her for accepting such generosity. "A fair trade." Margaret made a dismissive sound. "Nonsense. A coat for a ride is hardly equal, especially in weather like this. Austin did the right thing." She guided Hannah to a chair near the fire and took her cold hands, rubbing them briskly. "Your fingers are like ice. How long were you standing out there?" "An hour, perhaps," Hannah admitted. "Maybe longer. Time becomes difficult to judge in such conditions." Austin brought her a steaming mug of coffee, and Hannah wrapped her hands around it gratefully, inhaling the rich aroma. She took a sip and felt the warmth spread through her chest, slowly thawing the frozen core of her. "Miss Morgan is a schoolteacher," Austin said, settling into a chair across from her. "Or training to be one. I told her about the opening at the school." Margaret's face brightened immediately. "Oh, how wonderful! We have been desperate for someone qualified since Mrs. Henderson left. The children have been running wild for nearly 2 months now. Can you start immediately?" Hannah blinked at the speed of the offer. I would need to speak with the proper authorities first. The mayor or whoever oversees such hiring decisions." "That would be the town council, but they meet tomorrow evening," Margaret said, already planning. "In the meantime, you will need a place to stay. We have a spare room upstairs. You are welcome to it for as long as you need." "I could not possibly impose," Hannah protested, though her heart leaped at the offer. She had very little money left after her hasty departure from Denver, certainly not enough for an extended stay at a boarding house. "It is no imposition," Austin said firmly. "You helped facilitate it by needing help on the road. Besides, Ma has been wanting someone to fuss over since my sister moved to Kansas City last year." "Austin Miller, I do not fuss," Margaret said, but her eyes were twinkling. "I simply provide proper hospitality, which is more than can be said for some establishments in this town." Hannah felt something loosen in her chest, a knot of anxiety that had been tightening ever since she left Denver. These people, these strangers, were offering her kindness without asking for her story or judging her circumstances. It was more than she had dared to hope for. "Then I accept, with gratitude," she said softly. "I will, of course, help with chores and contribute however I can until I find proper employment." "We will sort all that out later," Margaret said, patting her hand. "For now you need food and rest. You look done in, dear." Over the next hour, Hannah found herself drawn into the warm circle of the Miller family. Andrew came in from tending to the horses, reporting that her mount would need a few days to fully recover, but would be good as new with proper care. They shared a hearty stew around the kitchen table, and Hannah learned that Austin worked his family's business breeding and training horses, with a particular talent for gentling the wild mustangs that still roamed the Colorado plains. "He has a gift with them," Andrew said proudly. "Can take a horse that would kick your head off and turn it into a mount fit for a lady within a month." "Pa exaggerates," Austin said, but Hannah could see the pleasure in his eyes at his father's praise. "I just have patience, that is all." "Patience and an understanding of their nature," Margaret corrected. "Our Austin always did have a way with frightened creatures. He is the one who nursed that baby deer back to health when it lost its mother to wolves, remember?" Austin ducked his head, clearly embarrassed by the attention, and Hannah found herself charmed by his modesty. In her experience, men who possessed genuine skill rarely boasted about it. After the meal, Margaret showed Hannah to the spare room upstairs. It was small but clean, with a comfortable-looking bed covered in a patchwork quilt and a window that looked out over the main street of Aurora. Hannah set down her small bag, which Andrew had retrieved from her horse, and sank onto the bed with a sigh of relief. "I have some dresses that might fit you," Margaret said from the doorway. "My daughter was about your size. I will bring them up after you have rested." "You have done so much already," Hannah said, feeling tears threaten again. "I do not know how to thank you." Margaret came into the room and sat beside her, taking her hand with a gentleness that reminded Hannah painfully of her own mother, before their relationship had fractured beyond repair. "You do not need to thank us, dear. We help because it is the right thing to do, and because I suspect you have had precious little kindness shown to you recently." Hannah's composure crumbled. The story came pouring out, the engagement her parents had arranged to a wealthy merchant twice her age, her refusal, the accusations that she was ungrateful and foolish, the final terrible argument that had ended with her father telling her she was no longer welcome in his house. She had taken what little money she had saved and fled, hearing of opportunities in the mining towns and hoping to find a fresh start where no one knew her story. Margaret listened without judgment, her hand steady and warm in Hannah's. When the tears finally subsided, she said quietly, "You did the right thing, refusing a marriage without love. I know it does not feel that way now, but in time you will see. A woman should have some say in who she spends her life with." "My mother said I was a fool," Hannah whispered. "That love was a luxury poor girls could not afford, and I should be grateful for the security he offered." "Your mother was wrong," Margaret said firmly. "Security means nothing if you spend every day of your life miserable. I married Andrew because I loved him, despite my family's objections that he was just a stable hand with no prospects. We built this business together from nothing, and I have never regretted choosing love over convenience." She squeezed Hannah's hand. "You will find your way, dear. And you will find love too when the time is right." After Margaret left, Hannah changed into a nightgown the older woman had provided and slipped beneath the quilts. Despite her exhaustion, sleep was slow to come. Her mind kept returning to the events of the day, to the moment Austin had offered her his coat without hesitation, to the way his arms had felt around her as they rode through the storm. She barely knew him, but something about his quiet strength and understated kindness had touched her deeply. She told herself it was simply gratitude, nothing more. She had no business entertaining romantic notions about a man she had just met, especially when her life was still in such turmoil. But as she finally drifted off to sleep, it was Austin's green eyes she saw in her dreams, warm and steady as summer grass. The next morning dawned clear and bitterly cold, the storm having blown itself out during the night. Hannah woke to find a dress laid out on the chair beside her bed, a lovely blue calico that looked almost new. She dressed quickly, braiding her dark hair and pinning it up in a simple style, then made her way downstairs. The kitchen was empty except for Austin, who stood at the stove frying eggs. He looked up when she entered and something flickered across his face too quickly for her to read. "Morning. I hope you slept well." "Better than I have in weeks," Hannah admitted. "Where are your parents? Pa is at the stables already, and Ma went to visit Mrs. Chen, who just had a baby. She left instructions for me to feed you a proper breakfast." He gestured to the table, which was set for two. "Sit. The eggs are almost ready." Hannah sat, feeling oddly shy in his presence now that they were alone. In the daylight, she could see him more clearly. The strong line of his jaw, the way his dark hair curled slightly at his collar, the calluses on his hands that spoke of hard work. He moved with an easy confidence in the kitchen that suggested he was comfortable there, not a man who expected to be waited on. "I wanted to thank you again," she said as he set a plate in front of her. "For yesterday, for everything." Austin took the seat across from her, his own plate in hand. "You already thanked me. No need to keep doing it. Still, I feel I should explain why I was out there alone, why I had so little preparation for the weather." "You do not owe me your story," Austin said, meeting her eyes steadily, "though I am willing to listen if you want to tell it." There was no pressure in his words, no expectation, and that very lack of demand made Hannah want to trust him. "I ran away from home," she said simply. "My parents wanted me to marry a man I could not love, and when I refused, they made it clear I was no longer welcome." Austin was quiet for a moment, his expression thoughtful. "That must have taken courage, or foolishness. I am not sure which yet." "Courage," he said firmly. "It takes more strength to stand up for what you believe in than to simply go along with what others expect of you. Especially when those expectations come from family. You sound as though you speak from experience." A shadow crossed his face. "My older brother wanted me to leave Aurora, go east with him to start a business in Chicago. He said there was no future in breeding horses, that the West was dying and I was a fool to stay. We had a falling out over it. I have not spoken to him in 3 years." "Do you regret staying?" Austin's answer was immediate. "Not for a second. This is my home. These are my people. I cannot imagine being anywhere else." He paused, then added quietly, "But I do regret the loss of my brother. Some days I wish I could have made him understand without us having to cut ties." "Perhaps one day he will come back," Hannah offered. "Perhaps. But I learned that you cannot live your life for other people's approval. You have to do what is right for you, even when it costs you something dear." He smiled then, breaking the somber mood. "Which is why I think you made the right choice, running away. Even if it did nearly get you frozen solid on a mountain road." Hannah laughed, surprised by the sound. It felt good to laugh, to feel something besides fear and uncertainty. "Well, when you put it that way, it does sound rather dramatic." "The best stories usually are," Austin said, and his eyes held hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. They finished breakfast in companionable silence, and then Austin suggested showing her around Aurora before the town council meeting that evening. Hannah agreed readily, eager to see the place that might become her new home. Aurora was indeed a thriving community, larger and more established than many of the rougher mining camps that dotted the Colorado Territory. The main street boasted a general store, a bank, a saloon, a church, and various other businesses that spoke of permanence rather than the temporary desperation of a boom town. Austin walked beside her, pointing out landmarks and introducing her to the people they encountered. "That is Doc Stevenson's office," he said, indicating a neat building with a sign hanging out front. "Best doctor in 3 counties. Trained back east and came out here to escape some scandal or other, though no one knows the details and he does not talk about it. He is a good man, though. Saved my life when I took a bad fall from a Mustang 2 years back. They passed the schoolhouse, a sturdy one-room building with windows on all sides to let in the light. Hannah stopped to peer through the glass, taking in the rows of desks, the blackboard at the front, the bookshelf along one wall. Her heart gave a little leap at the sight. She could imagine herself there, teaching children their letters and numbers, being part of building something meaningful in this raw, new land. "You look like you belong there," Austin said softly, and when she glanced at him, she found him watching her with an expression she could not quite decipher. "I hope the town council agrees with you," she said, trying to ignore the flutter in her stomach his words caused. They continued their tour, stopping at the general store where Austin introduced her to the proprietor, a friendly Chinese man named Mr. Y, who had come to Colorado during the gold rush and stayed to build a business. His store was well stocked and organized, carrying everything from flour and sugar to bolts of cloth and farming implements. "Miss Morgan may be our new school teacher," Austin told him. "She will need to establish an account once she is settled." Mr. Y beamed at her. "Then you have my business, Miss Morgan, and my children when school opens again. They are eager to continue their education." Hannah felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders, but it was a good weight, purposeful. These people needed her skills, her knowledge. She could make a real difference here, build a life that mattered. As they left the store, Austin said, "I should probably warn you that the town council can be a bit intimidating. There are 7 members, and they take their responsibilities seriously. But they are fair, and they need you as much as you need this position. What should I expect? Questions about your education, your experience with children, your reasons for coming to Aurora. Be honest with them. They will respect that more than any attempt to make yourself sound better than you are." That evening, Hannah dressed carefully in the best of the dresses Margaret had given her, a deep green wool that brought out the hazel in her eyes. She braided her hair into a coronet around her head, trying to look both professional and approachable. Her hands shook slightly as she fastened the buttons, nerves making her clumsy. A knock on her door made her jump. "Miss Morgan, it is time to go if you want to be early." She opened the door to find Austin standing there in his own best clothes, a clean shirt and vest, his hair neatly combed. He looked at her, and something heated flickered in his eyes before he quickly looked away. "You look very professional. They will be impressed." "I hope so," Hannah said, smoothing down her skirt. "I am terribly nervous. Do not be. You are exactly what they have been looking for." He offered his arm, a gesture that felt both old-fashioned and entirely natural. "Shall we?" The town council met in a room above the bank, accessed by an exterior staircase. 7 men were already seated around a large table when Austin ushered Hannah inside, and they all looked up with varying degrees of interest and curiosity. Mayor Collins, a portly man with a full beard and keen eyes, stood to greet them. "Austin, good to see you. And this must be Miss Morgan. We heard you were in town. Please have a seat." The interview that followed was thorough but not unkind. They asked about her education, a topic on which she could speak with confidence thanks to her years at a ladies' academy in Denver. They inquired about her teaching philosophy, her ability to manage children of different ages in a single classroom, her knowledge of various subjects. She answered as honestly as she could, drawing on her training and her natural love of learning. "And why Aurora?" asked Councilman Harrison, a rancher with weathered features and a direct manner. "You come from Denver, a city with opportunities. Why seek a position in a rough town like this?" Hannah took a breath, weighing her words. "Because I believe education matters most where it is hardest to obtain. Children in cities have access to multiple schools and teachers. Children here have fewer resources, but that makes their education no less important. I want to be somewhere I can make a real difference, where my work matters." It was a diplomatic answer, but it was also true. She saw several of the council members nodding thoughtfully. "And you are prepared to commit to at least a full school year?" Mayor Collins asked. "We cannot afford to lose another teacher mid-term." "I have nowhere else to go," Hannah said simply. "I left my family in Denver and I am looking to build a new life here. If you give me this opportunity, I will give you everything I have." The council members exchanged glances, some form of silent communication passing between them. Finally, Mayor Collins smiled. "Miss Morgan, I believe we have heard enough. The position is yours if you want it. The salary is $30 a month, plus use of the teacher's cottage behind the school. School resumes in 1 week, giving you time to prepare." Relief and joy flooded through Hannah so powerfully that she felt dizzy. "Thank you," she managed. "Thank you so much. I will not disappoint you." After working out the details of her contract and receiving keys to the schoolhouse and cottage, Hannah practically floated down the stairs on Austin's arm. The night was clear and cold, stars brilliant overhead, but she barely felt the chill. "You did it," Austin said, and the pride in his voice was unmistakable. "I knew you would." "I could not have without you," Hannah said, stopping to face him on the boardwalk. "You gave me the chance, introducing me to your family, to the mayor. I owe you a tremendous debt." Austin's expression grew serious. "You owe me nothing, Hannah. I helped because I wanted to, because from the moment I saw you on that road, freezing but still standing tall, I knew you were someone special, someone worth knowing." The use of her first name, the intimacy of it, made her pulse quicken. "Austin, I know it is too soon," he said quickly. "I know you have just arrived, just started to build your life here, but I would like to call on you properly, to see if what I am feeling is not just my imagination." Hannah's heart hammered in her chest. It was too soon, far too soon after everything she had been through. And yet, when she looked at him, at this man who had given her his coat and asked nothing in return, who had opened his home and his heart to a stranger, she felt something she had never felt before. Not with the merchant her parents had chosen, not with any of the young men who had courted her in Denver. This was different, real, a pull that went deeper than logic or propriety. "I would like that," she said softly. "I would like that very much." The smile that spread across Austin's face was like sunrise, transforming him completely. He took her hand, his thumb brushing across her knuckles in a gesture that was both tender and thrilling. "Then I will come by tomorrow, after you have had time to settle into your cottage. We can take a walk if the weather holds." Hannah nodded, not trusting her voice. They stood there for a long moment, hands clasped, before Austin reluctantly released her and offered his arm again. "Come on. We should get you back before Ma sends out a search party." The next week passed in a blur of activity. Hannah moved into the teacher's cottage, a small but well-built structure with a bedroom, a sitting room, and a kitchen with a stove that actually worked. Margaret and several other women from the town brought her furniture, dishes, linens, all the necessities for setting up a household. Hannah was overwhelmed by their generosity, by how readily they had accepted her into their community. Austin came by every evening as promised. Sometimes they walked through town together, and he showed her more of Aurora and its surroundings. Other times they sat in her small parlor, talking by lamplight about everything and nothing. She learned about his childhood, about how he had always preferred the company of animals to people, about the dreams he had for expanding his family's business. He learned about her love of books, about the poetry she wrote in secret, about her fear that she would not be good enough, that she would fail these children who were counting on her. "You will not fail," Austin told her one evening, his certainty absolute. "You care too much to fail." That is what makes a good teacher, not just knowledge but caring about whether the students learn. With each conversation, each shared confidence, Hannah felt herself falling deeper. It terrified her, this intensity of emotion for a man she had known less than 2 weeks. But it also felt inevitable, as though everything in her life had been leading to this moment, this person. The day before school was set to open, Austin arrived at her cottage with something wrapped in brown paper. "I have a gift for you," he said, looking almost shy. "For your first day." Hannah unwrapped the package to find a beautiful leather satchel, sturdy and well made, with her initials tooled into the side. "Austin, this is too much." "It is practical," he protested. "Every teacher needs a bag for carrying books and supplies. And I made it myself, so it is not as though it cost me anything but time." Hannah ran her fingers over the smooth leather, touched beyond words. "You made this. For me. I wanted you to have something to mark the occasion, something that would last." She looked up at him, this man who kept surprising her with his thoughtfulness, his skill, his capacity for kindness. "It is perfect, thank you." Austin stepped closer, and Hannah's breath caught as he raised his hand to cup her cheek. His palm was warm and rough against her skin, his touch gentle. "I know I said I would take this slow, give you time. But Hannah, I have to tell you that I am falling in love with you. I have been since that first day when you looked at me with those brave eyes and accepted help, even though your pride was screaming at you to refuse. You are the strongest, most remarkable woman I have ever met, and I cannot imagine my life without you in it anymore." Hannah's eyes filled with tears, but they were good tears, joyful tears. "I am falling in love with you too," she whispered. "I tried to tell myself it was too soon, that I was just grateful for your help, but it is more than that, so much more." Austin's smile was radiant as he bent his head, giving her time to pull away if she wanted. But Hannah did not want to. She rose on her toes to meet him, and when their lips touched, it felt like coming home. The kiss was soft and sweet, full of promise and possibility, and Hannah felt the last pieces of her heart that she had been guarding so carefully crack open and let him in. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Austin rested his forehead against hers. "I want to marry you, Hannah. I know it is fast, but I am certain. I have never been more certain of anything in my life." "Yes," Hannah said, not needing to think about it. "Yes, I will marry you." They sealed the promise with another kiss, and then Austin pulled her into his arms, holding her close. Hannah wrapped her arms around his waist and breathed in the scent of him, leather and horse and home. For the first time since leaving Denver, she felt truly safe, truly hopeful about the future. Her first day of teaching was both exhilarating and exhausting. 23 children of varying ages filed into the schoolhouse that morning, eyeing her with a mixture of curiosity and skepticism. Hannah stood at the front of the room, wearing her new blue dress and carrying her new leather satchel, and introduced herself with as much confidence as she could muster. The children tested her, of course. The older boys tried to see if they could make her flustered with impertinent questions. The younger girls whispered and giggled in the back row. But Hannah had been trained for this, and more importantly, she genuinely cared about these children and their education. She was firm but fair, setting clear expectations and then following through on them. By the end of the first week, she had earned their respect, and by the end of the first month, she had earned their affection. Austin was her constant support through those early weeks of adjustment. He would stop by the schoolhouse at the end of each day to walk her home, listening to her stories about the students and offering advice when she felt overwhelmed. He introduced her to more people in town, helped her feel like she belonged in Aurora rather than just being the new teacher. Word of their engagement spread quickly through the small community, and Hannah was surprised by how readily people accepted it. Margaret was thrilled, already planning the wedding with an enthusiasm that was both touching and slightly overwhelming. Andrew welcomed her into the family with the same quiet warmth he showed to everyone. Even the townspeople who did not know her well offered congratulations, seeming genuinely happy that their new teacher was putting down roots. They set the wedding date for Christmas Day, giving Hannah time to establish herself in her role, and giving them both time to prepare for the future they would build together. Austin began building an addition to his family's house, creating a private space where he and Hannah could start their married life while still being close to his parents. Hannah threw herself into her teaching, determined to prove that the council's faith in her had not been misplaced. As autumn deepened and the aspens turned gold on the mountainsides, Hannah found herself happier than she had ever been. Her students were progressing wonderfully, several of the older ones showing real promise. The community had embraced her fully, inviting her to social gatherings and asking her advice on matters beyond just education. And Austin, her Austin, was everything she had never dared to hope for in a partner. One evening in late November, almost exactly a year after the day they had met, Austin took her back to the spot on the road where he had found her. The weather was cold but clear, the stars brilliant overhead. They stood together looking out over the valley, and Austin wrapped his arms around her from behind, pulling her back against his chest. "You ever regret it?" he asked quietly. "Leaving everything behind, coming here?" Hannah turned in his arms to face him. "Not for a single moment." That day, freezing on this road, was the beginning of my real life. Everything before was just preparation for this, for you, for the home we are building together. "I keep thinking about how easily we could have missed each other," Austin said. "If I had left for the supply run an hour earlier, if you had taken shelter somewhere along the road, if 100 little things had been different." "But they were not different," Hannah said, reaching up to cup his face. "We found each other exactly when we were supposed to. You gave me your coat, Austin. You kept me from freezing, yes, but you gave me so much more than that. You gave me a home, a family, a future. You gave me love." Austin kissed her then, deep and passionate, and Hannah felt the truth of their connection down to her bones. This was not a rushed decision or a desperate escape. This was real, solid, a foundation they could build a life on. They were married on Christmas Day, 1883, in the small church in Aurora. The whole town turned out for the occasion, cramming into the pews to witness Hannah Morgan become Hannah Miller. She wore a dress that Margaret and the other women of the town had made for her, white satin with lace at the collar and cuffs, simple but elegant. Austin wore his best suit, his dark hair neatly combed, his eyes never leaving her face as she walked down the aisle to meet him. When the preacher asked if they promised to love and cherish each other for all their days, their responses rang out clear and certain. Austin slipped a gold band on her finger, and Hannah did the same for him, their hands clasped tight. And when the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, the kiss they shared was witnessed by a whole community that had become family, that had embraced two people who had found each other on a frozen road and chosen love over fear. The reception was held at the Miller home, with tables of food and a fiddle player providing music for dancing. Hannah danced with Austin, with Andrew, with seemingly every man in town who wanted to congratulate the bride. But always her eyes found Austin's across the room, and always he was watching her, his love written plain on his face. As the evening wore on, and the guests finally began to depart, Austin pulled Hannah aside and led her out to the new addition he had built. It was finished now, a cozy suite of rooms with a bedroom, a small parlor, and even a little office where Hannah could prepare her lessons. A fire crackled in the fireplace, warming the space, and someone had decorated with pine boughs and ribbons, making it feel festive and welcoming. "Welcome home, Mrs. Miller," Austin said, and the pride and love in his voice made Hannah's eyes sting with happy tears. "Welcome home," she echoed, and pulled him down for a kiss that promised everything their future would hold. Their marriage was everything Hannah had dreamed of and more. Austin was an attentive husband, thoughtful and passionate in equal measure. He supported her teaching career completely, never suggesting she should give it up to focus solely on household duties. They worked together as partners, making decisions jointly, building their life side by side. The school continued to thrive under Hannah's leadership. She expanded the curriculum, adding lessons in history and science alongside the traditional reading and arithmetic. She started a library with books donated by families in town and ordered from publishers back east. She organized spelling bees and recitation contests that the whole town attended, turning education into a community event. Austin's horse business grew as well, his reputation for training quality animals spreading throughout Colorado and beyond. He began breeding specifically for temperament and endurance, creating a line of horses that were prized by ranchers and settlers alike. Together, the Millers became one of the most respected families in Aurora, known for their hard work and their commitment to the community. In the fall of 1884, Hannah discovered she was expecting their first child. The news filled both of them with joy and no small amount of terror. Hannah worried about managing her teaching duties while pregnant, about what kind of mother she would be. Austin worried about keeping both his wife and child safe, about being the kind of father a child deserved. But they faced these fears together, supporting each other through the challenges. Hannah taught through her pregnancy until the very end, finally taking leave just 2 weeks before the baby was due. The women of Aurora rallied around her, bringing meals and advice and reassurance. Margaret was in her element, fussing over her daughter-in-law with the same dedication she had shown her own children. In May of 1885, Hannah gave birth to a healthy baby boy. They named him Andrew, after Austin's father, and from the moment Austin held his son for the first time, Hannah knew she had never seen her husband so completely undone by emotion. He cradled the tiny infant with such tenderness, such awe, that she fell in love with him all over again. Being parents changed them both in ways they could never have anticipated. The lack of sleep was brutal, and there were moments when Hannah wondered if she would ever feel like herself again. But there were also moments of such profound joy that she felt her heart might burst. Andrew's first smile, directed at his father, the way he would calm when Austin sang to him in his deep, rumbling voice, the fierce protectiveness she felt whenever she held him, knowing she would do anything to keep him safe. Hannah returned to teaching that fall, bringing Andrew with her to school. The older girls took turns helping care for him during lessons, and the children all adored having a baby in the classroom. It was unconventional, certainly, but it worked for their family and for the community. Over the next several years, they added 2 more children to their family. A daughter, Margaret Elizabeth, arrived in 1887, and another son, James, came in 1889. Their house expanded again to accommodate the growing family, and their life became wonderfully chaotic with the noise and energy of children. Through it all, Austin and Hannah remained deeply in love. They made time for each other despite the demands of work and parenting, stealing moments alone when they could. They still took walks together in the evenings when weather permitted, still sat up late talking about their dreams and plans for the future. The passion that had sparked between them that first winter never faded, but it matured into something richer, deeper, a love built on years of shared experience and mutual respect. Aurora grew and changed around them. The railroad came through in 1890, connecting them more directly to Denver and the East. More families moved in, drawn by the opportunities in mining and ranching. The school expanded, requiring the addition of a second room and eventually a second teacher to help Hannah manage the growing number of students. But through all the changes, the Millers remained a constant, a family that embodied the best of what the West could be. They were known for their generosity, always willing to help a neighbor in need. They were known for their integrity, dealing honestly in business and holding themselves to high standards. And they were known for their love, a partnership so strong and genuine that it inspired others. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Austin surprised Hannah with a trip back to the spot where they had first met. Their children were staying with Margaret and Andrew for the night, giving them rare time alone. They stood together as the sun set over the mountains, turning the snow-covered peaks pink and gold. "You remember what you said that day?" Austin asked, his arms wrapped around her. "When I offered you my coat." "I said I could not take it, that you would freeze," Hannah replied, smiling at the memory of her younger self, so proud and frightened. "And I told you I had layers beneath, that I was used to the weather. But the truth is, I would have frozen solid if it meant keeping you warm." I knew it even then, as crazy as that sounds. One look at you, and I was done for. Hannah turned to face him, reaching up to touch his face. There was gray threading through his dark hair now, lines around his eyes that had not been there when they met. But he was still her Austin, still the man who had given her everything without asking for anything in return. "You saved my life that day," she said softly. "Not just from the cold, though you did that too. You saved me from a life without love, without purpose, without joy. You gave me everything I never knew I needed." "You did the same for me," Austin said. "I was content before you, but I was not alive. Not really. You woke me up, Hannah. You made me want to be better, do more, reach higher. You made my life mean something." They kissed as the stars began to appear overhead, the same stars that had witnessed their first kiss on this spot years ago. And Hannah thought about the strange, wonderful path that had led her here. The scandal that had driven her from Denver, the storm that had stranded her on a frozen road, the cowboy who had offered his coat to a shivering stranger. Each moment had been necessary, each choice had led to the next, until she had arrived at this perfect life. The years continued to pass, bringing new challenges and new joys. Their children grew, each developing their own personalities and interests. Andrew proved to have his father's gift with horses and began learning the business while still in his teens. Margaret was academically gifted, absorbing knowledge like a sponge and expressing interest in becoming a doctor someday. James was the artist of the family, always sketching and painting the world around him. Hannah eventually retired from teaching in 1900, after 15 years of shaping young minds. The school held a celebration in her honor, and former students came from all over Colorado to pay tribute to the teacher who had believed in them, challenged them, and helped them become more than they thought possible. It was one of the proudest days of her life, seeing the evidence of all those years of work in the accomplished adults her students had become. But retirement did not mean slowing down. Hannah threw herself into community work, helping to establish a library in Aurora and serving on various civic committees. She wrote articles for the local newspaper about education and women's suffrage, using her voice to advocate for progress. And she continued to be Austin's partner in every sense, helping with the business decisions that would shape their family's future. Austin remained active in the horse business well into his 50s, though he gradually turned more of the day-to-day operations over to Andrew. He took up woodworking as a hobby, creating beautiful furniture that he gave as gifts to family and friends. And he devoted himself to being a grandfather when their children began having families of their own, spoiling his grandchildren with the same tender attention he had always given to everything he loved. On a warm June evening in 1912, 30 years after that fateful day on the frozen road, Austin and Hannah sat together on the porch of their home, watching the sun set over Aurora. The town had grown into a small city now, with paved streets and electric lights, so different from the rough frontier community where they had built their life. But some things had not changed. The mountains still rose majestic to the west, the stars still filled the night sky, and the love between them still burned as bright as ever. "We did all right, did not we?" Austin said, taking her hand in his. His fingers were gnarled now with age, but his grip was still strong, still sure. "We did better than all right," Hannah replied, leaning her head on his shoulder. "We built something beautiful, a family, a legacy, a life that mattered." "All because you needed a ride on a cold day," Austin said, and she could hear the smile in his voice. "All because you were willing to give your coat to a stranger," Hannah corrected. "That was when I knew, you know, not consciously but somewhere deep down. When you wrapped that coat around me without expecting anything in return, I knew you were different, special, mine." Austin turned to kiss her temple, a gesture he had performed thousands of times over their decades together, but which still made her heart flutter. "Always yours. From that first moment until my last breath, I am yours." They sat together in the gathering darkness, two people who had found each other against all odds and built a love that had lasted a lifetime. Around them, their family thrived, their children, successful and happy in their own lives. Their grandchildren, carrying forward the values they had worked so hard to instill. The community they had helped build, stronger and richer for their contributions. It was not a perfect life. They had faced hardships, losses, disappointments along the way. But they had faced them together, drawing strength from each other, and that had made all the difference. The coat Austin had given Hannah on that frozen road had become a symbol for everything their marriage represented: protection, warmth, selfless care. A willingness to sacrifice for the other's well-being. A love that put the other person first. Hannah thought back to that frightened young woman standing on a lonely road, certain her life was over before it had really begun. If she could speak to that version of herself now, she would tell her to have courage, to trust that the hard road ahead led somewhere beautiful. She would tell her that the man riding out of the storm would become her whole world, and that choosing to accept his help, to take a chance on kindness, would be the best decision she ever made. But that young woman could not have understood, not yet. Some truths can only be learned through living, through the accumulation of shared days and nights that transform strangers into soulmates. All Hannah had known in that moment was that she was cold and lost, and a cowboy had offered his coat. It was such a small gesture, really. Such a simple act of human decency. And yet it had changed everything. As the stars emerged one by one overhead, Austin and Hannah sat together in the home they had built, surrounded by the life they had created, secure in the love that had sustained them through 3 decades of joy and struggle. And if you had asked either of them whether they would change anything about their journey, they would have told you no. Not a single moment. Because every step, every choice, every challenge had led them exactly where they were meant to be, together. Always together. Two souls who had found each other on a frozen road and decided to walk the rest of the way hand in hand. The years that followed were full and rich, bringing the deep satisfaction that comes from a life well lived. Hannah wrote her memoirs at the urging of her grandchildren, documenting not just her own story but the history of Aurora as she had witnessed it, from rough frontier town to thriving city. The book became a treasured local history, used in schools throughout Colorado to teach children about the courage and determination of the settlers who had built the West. Austin remained vital and engaged well into his 70s, his mind sharp even as his body slowly failed him. He loved nothing more than sitting on the porch with Hannah, greeting the neighbors who still stopped by to seek his advice on horse matters, or just to visit with the man who had become something of a legend in Aurora. The older residents remembered him as the young cowboy who could gentle any wild Mustang, who had built a thriving business through skill and integrity. The younger ones knew him as the patriarch of the Miller family, a man whose love for his wife was so evident that it restored their faith in romance. Hannah devoted her later years to her family and her writing, also serving as a mentor to young women in Aurora who sought education and independence. She never forgot how alone and frightened she had been that day on the road, and she made it her mission to help other women find their own strength and voice. She funded scholarships for girls who wanted to attend teachers' college, and she opened her home to those who needed a safe place while they figured out their next steps. Their children remained close, building their own homes near the family property so that holidays and Sunday dinners kept everyone connected. Andrew took over the horse business completely, expanding it in new directions while honoring the foundation his father had built. Margaret became a nurse, one of the first women in Colorado to pursue medicine professionally, and used her skills to serve the community that had raised her. James became a successful artist whose paintings of the Colorado landscape were shown in galleries from Denver to San Francisco, but he always returned to Aurora, to the place that fed his creative spirit. The grandchildren multiplied, filling the Miller home with laughter and chaos during visits. Austin and Hannah delighted in each one, seeing pieces of themselves and their children reflected in these new generations. They told stories of the old days, of what Aurora had been like before electricity and automobiles, keeping the history alive for those who would carry it forward. In the spring of 1918, as Austin approached his 72nd birthday, his health began to decline more rapidly. He had been slowing down for years, but suddenly he seemed to fade, the vital energy that had always defined him draining away. The doctor was honest with the family that the end was approaching, that it was time to prepare. Hannah never left his side during those final weeks. She sat beside his bed, holding his hand, reading to him from his favorite books, reminding him of the life they had shared. Their children came daily, bringing grandchildren to say goodbye, though the youngest did not understand why Grandpa could not get up to play with them anymore. On a warm evening in early May, with the windows open to let in the spring breeze and the whole family gathered around, Austin opened his eyes and looked at Hannah with complete clarity. "Do you remember," he said, his voice weak but determined, "when I gave you my coat?" "I remember," Hannah said through her tears, clutching his hand. "I will never forget. You saved me that day." "You saved me too," Austin whispered. "Every day since, you saved me. Best decision I ever made stopping on that road. Best thing that ever happened to me finding you." "And to me," Hannah said, leaning down to kiss his forehead, "you were everything I never knew I needed, everything I could have hoped for and more." Austin smiled, that same smile that had captured her heart 3 decades earlier. "Love you, Hannah, always and forever." "Always and forever," she echoed and held his hand as he slipped away, surrounded by the family they had built and the love that had defined their life together. Hannah grieved deeply, as anyone would who had lost their soulmate, their partner of 35 years. But she did not fall apart. Austen had taught her to be strong, to face whatever came with courage and grace, and she honored his memory by continuing to live fully. She remained active in the community, continued her writing, continued to be a source of wisdom and support for her family. She lived another 12 years, long enough to see her grandchildren grown and starting families of their own. She saw Aurora continue to transform, watched as the automobile replaced the horse, as modern conveniences changed daily life in ways she never could have imagined as a young woman. But through all the changes, she held fast to the values that mattered, to the lessons she and Austen had learned together about love and commitment and building something that would last. When Hannah Miller passed away peacefully in her sleep in 1930, at the age of 70, the whole city of Aurora mourned. Her funeral was the largest the city had ever seen, with hundreds of people coming to pay their respects to the woman who had taught so many of them, who had shaped their community in countless ways. Former students, now middle-aged themselves, spoke of how she had changed their lives. Women she had mentored testified to her generosity and wisdom. Family members told stories that made the mourners laugh through their tears. She was buried beside Austen in the Aurora Cemetery, under a simple headstone that bore both their names and a single line: "Love that began on a frozen road and warmed two lives forever." The story of Hannah and Austen Miller became part of Aurora's legend, told and retold over the years. The schoolhouse where Hannah had taught was eventually torn down to make way for a modern building, but a plaque commemorated her service there. The Miller Horse Ranch continued to operate for 2 more generations before being sold, but the family name remained synonymous with quality and integrity throughout Colorado. And sometimes, on cold winter days when the wind blew down from the mountains, old-timers would tell young people about the day a cowboy gave his coat to a stranded stranger and found the love of his life. They would talk about how one simple act of kindness had rippled out through time, creating a family, shaping a community, proving that love could flourish even in the harshest conditions if 2 people were willing to protect and cherish each other. The coat itself, that worn sheepskin garment that had started it all, was preserved by the Miller family and eventually donated to the Aurora Historical Society. It sits in a display case now, accompanied by a photograph of Hannah and Austen on their wedding day, young and beautiful and full of hope. Visitors stop to read the placard explaining its significance, and more than one couple has stood before it hand in hand, inspired by the reminder that true love often begins with the simplest gestures of caring and compassion. Because in the end, that is what the story of Hannah and Austen Miller teaches us. That love is not about grand romantic gestures or perfect circumstances. It is about seeing someone in need and offering what you have, even if it leaves you cold. It is about accepting help with grace, even when pride wants you to refuse. It is about building a life together day by day, choice by choice, always putting the other person first. It is about wrapping someone in warmth, both literal and figurative, and trusting that they will do the same for you. It is about a coat given freely on a cold day, and all the love that followed.